concept of getting kids to overlearn concepts. And I think sometimes as parents we become like, overlearn, why can't they just learn so we can move on to something else, right? We need them to be unconsciously skilled. So if you think about when you're learning to drive, does anybody here have a driver? A new driver? Okay. You have a friend? Okay, well when you think about when you're behind the wheel for the first time and it's like, okay, how much pressure do I put on my foot for the gas or the brake, and how do I do the blinker? I'm going left, is it up or down, and what, and then we move up the ladder here until we get to the point where you can do a lot of different tasks while driving, can hold a conversation without having to think about which way do I have to put my turning signal. Because we then can use cognitive resources for something else. That's what we need to get to with our phonics capabilities. Just kind of, again, reinforcing the connection between the sound and symbol. This is, Dr. Kilpatrick, who is the guru of phonemic awareness, came up with this research, and this kind of aligns to what we're expecting in our grade level. So at the kindergarten level, these early phonological skills, and matching that up into learning letter names and learning letter sounds. Basic phonemic awareness, starting to blend those sounds and segmenting those sounds. That's when we're starting that phonics, decoding the sounding out of things. And then ultimately, as we get into second grade, starting those advanced phonemic awareness concepts. That's why we have to continue phonemic awareness into second grade. Because then we develop the ability to complete orthographically map. So automatically map the grapheme onto the sounds, and then they're exponentially expanding their reading vocabulary and reading, as Tolga mentioned, as if by sight. So, to answer some of your questions before, assessment is a really huge part of this. We want to make sure our assessments are addressing all 4 parts of our processing system. So we have just kind of a quick review of our different types of assessments. Screening measures are quick, reliable measures that predict later reading. So we have letter naming fluency and then nonsense word fluency that are really tapping into what are my child's phonics skills. For progress monitoring, those would be used as the same. For diagnostic tools, which Kate, you might be better to speak about this, but largely don't see these on evaluations. So they're not digging into a lot of what does my child know about the phonics scope and sequences. Yeah.
Pretty much.
What?
There's pretty much no phonics diagnostic assessment on any evaluations that I've seen.
Unless you specifically ask.
Unless you ask for them, yeah. There are some phonemic awareness assessments.
Right.
Yeah.
So the WIS and the Woodcock-Johnson reading mastery are specific measures that I would like to ask for in an evaluation to tell me, especially if you have a middle school age student and there's a problem, but they're compensating so it doesn't look like there's a problem in school. This is what's going to start to dig that out, as well as an in-depth phonological awareness tool like the CTAL.
Does it change when they're 16? I know some of their tests change.
No, the WIS and the Woodcock-Johnson would continue. You would be able to use that. The CTOP is you can use up through adulthood. So yes.
I have a child who's going to be transitioning out of an early intervention program into kindergarten, and they're going to be doing a full evaluation. But what should I be asking for someone that young in an assessment?
I would love to talk to you, and I know there's parents here that would also be able to advise you on that.
Cool. Thank
And
you.
it's important to probably do that before you get the evaluation. Like, so you have the information before you go into it, you can be informed about what you want them to do. Because they don't know your kid,
Right.
and it can be more generic when
Got
coming
it.
in. But if you have some assistance, it can be really helpful.
Okay. And you're at a great age to catch them.
Yes.
Yeah, like really good.
So this is the beginning of my handoff, but this is the benchmark assessment. Since we are here in TE, looking at what the TE school district uses, their kind of menu of what they're doing when, and just reinforcing this graphic that we took from our first talk about which of those four processing areas are being addressed by these assessment measures. So the phonological processor, we have first sound fluency and phoneme segmentation fluency. I always like to say, and I'm sure Kate will speak to this a little bit, but if your child has a low oral reading fluency score or a maze score, it really demands digging deeper. Okay, so if you think about that four-part processor, the fluency is running up and down the side. If you have low fluency scores, you have to dig in to figure out why, what is the problem.
Maze sample.
I'm sorry?
Maze sample.
Maze,
It's a
closed procedure.
yeah, I don't know if it actually stands for anything, but there's a blank word, they have 3 words that they have to select that makes sense with that, so there's decoding as well as context vocabulary also being assessed.
And one thing that I would say, especially in our community, is that if you are seeing a mismatch between these scores and your child's listening comprehension or their verbal ability that you've noticed since they were little, that is an enormous red flag. So these norms are normed nationally. They're not normed in our community. And we have parents who have become successful and are compensators who probably have similar profiles to their kids. So we help a lot of parents in the district, and a lot of kids we see sometimes will be at what's called benchmark on these assessments, but compared to what their verbal ability is, it doesn't match. And so as a parent, that is a huge red flag. And we're giving you information to help inform you so that you can get help outside of school, you can support your kid on your own, and you can ask the right questions of the school district to kind of support that and make sure that there's not an issue. And hopefully, with a new core reading curriculum and maybe some supplemental phonemic awareness instruction or phonemic awareness instruction, some of that won't be as prevalent. But that's something I think for those of us who have experienced it and have had to go through years and years and whose kids have gotten intervention later, we like to see the people who catch it early and are able to kind of, sometimes they can help their kids at home on their own, and because of that, the brain and the way it is when kids are little, if you're following evidence-based practices at home, you can sometimes support your kid to a point where they don't end up frustrated.
So what I hear you saying is that if your child already has accommodations, that maybe you can hold the district accountable. There's a big disparity, but if they are just maybe compensating and don't already have accommodations, it's less likely that they get.
Well,
Sure.
I guess I'm talking about little kids because these benchmarks are for little kids. So this
Okay.
is like K4. If you're noticing something that the teacher's not noticing and these benchmarks are okay, or they say, you need to let the teacher know and you need to investigate.
And I would also just add to that, I would specifically say, what percentile is my child performing at on these measures? Because I don't know that that's
It definitely
very
is not
apparent.
articulated, but we'll talk. I'm going to give you guys an overview of the benchmarks so that you understand them more, so that when you go in and talk about them, you can ask the right questions and see if that mismatch is there. I'm assuming some of you are here because you have struggling readers, so sometimes it can be, especially it's conference time. So.
Yes. I just have a few more things. So I liked this graphic. So even for our older readers, looking at reading comprehension, if their reading comprehension is on grade level, work on grade level curriculum. If their reading comprehension is low, we want to look at their oral reading fluency. If that's at grade level, work on comprehension. If it's low, look at our phonics decoding survey. If at grade level, work on fluency strategies. If the phonics is poor, looking at phonological awareness. If that is poor, looking at specialized assessment. So, just trying to make sure we're going through and understanding all the different levels where children might be having difficulties. So,
Do you know what?
yeah. I also think one of my slides got lost in translation somehow, but it's my fault. There's a really great book, so just what.
Oh, yeah, I might have pulled the one. Sorry.
There's a really great book for parents. It's at 100 simple.
I think it's on your printout. It should be on
Okay.
your printout. Yeah, you have the slide,
Some
it's
of
just
the
not.
slides were out of order and some.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It's slide 43.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And I think on there also, I put a link to videos as well. So if you go onto that link, they have videos about how to perform. It was written for parents. I'm not gonna say, it's like, don't pick it up and expect to sit down with your child immediately. It's gonna take some pre-reading. But it was written for parents. It's meant for, obviously, your younger students, so it might be something that you might wanna invest in for your own home. But I think it's really great to understand as a parent what is supposed to be happening in the classroom and then probing the teachers about that. All right.
Oh, sorry guys. So I am going to tell you a little bit about benchmarks. Benchmarks are like a thermometer, and if you're not in TE, almost every school district will do benchmarks for kids in elementary school. I'm gonna, basically, they use them to assess the possibility of success or risk for students. They're usually given according to research-based prescribed schedules determined by the group that publishes them. So there are different brands of benchmarks, universal screeners. And they each have different strengths and weaknesses and different protocols. But if you're not giving them according to protocol, you're kind of missing some of the purpose of them, and you can miss kids because of that. In our district, the other thing for you as parents to note is they give you a starting place in determining where your kid is, but you have a lot of information on your own that also is important in terms of determining how your child is performing in terms of their reading acquisition. In TE, all students in kindergarten through grades 4 participate in benchmark testing, and I'm going to show you, it's confusing. It took me years to kind of dig into this. With my first kid, I knew nothing about benchmarks, and I missed his struggles until he was in 2nd grade. We'll dig into these, but if you're from a different district, I think you just start by asking your teachers, your administrators, what your benchmark schedule is, and trying to get as much information as you can. Here are our benchmarks. In TE, this is the schedule that we follow in kindergarten through 4th grade. And we do beginning, middle, and end of the year. Right now, you're all awaiting, if you have elementary schoolers, you're awaiting this winter benchmark report. And this year, they just started putting the benchmarks on Power School. And I'll share a screen to show you what that looks like. Here are the acronyms or the abbreviations for what everything is, but you can see some of these are directly related to what Jackie showed you with that 4-part processor. Mm-hmm. The phonemic awareness tools are the PSF, or phonemic segmentation fluency, and you can see that they're doing that in the middle and end of kindergarten and the beginning of 1st grade. And then we have the first sound fluency and the letter naming fluency, and those are phonics skills. Those are not phonemic awareness skills. We also have nonsense word fluency, and what that means is your child is given a list of words that are not real words, and they're scored on how fast they can sound them out accurately. And there are 2 different things there. There are the number of correct letter sounds that they get, and then also the number of whole words that they read. Finally, this is that fluency that they talked about, that Jackie talked about. This is kind of the big thermometer. That you're going to see across the board from 1st grade through 4th grade once we get to the middle of the year in 1st grade. And then there are 3 other assessments on here that are not part of what we call the Acadience benchmark system. The first one is this kindergarten inventory of developmental screening, and that is what your child took before they got to kindergarten. It is homegrown, so we developed it as a district, and it assesses a lot of different areas like letters, sounds, numbers, all sorts of things. It's not norm reference. So if a child is assessed on the kindergarten screener, they can get basically 100% at the beginning, and it's the same test beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't adjust based on the time of year, or it's also not compared to peers. It's just kind of a finite dip into what they know. And then in terms of this Shaywitz dyslexia screener, we have not learned a lot about that. What we know is that this must be used with other benchmarks to determine whether or not students are at risk. And I have not talked to any parents yet who have actually gotten information from that. So I'm not sure. I know that they started using it last summer or May. So I'm not sure, but if you have young kids, if you have kindergartners, I would ask about that. And tonight I'm going to share something with you. It's in your packet. It's called it's this student literacy profile. So if you're concerned about your child, this is a teacher tool, but I think it's really helpful for parents. Read through this, and on the back is actually the Colorado Learning Difficulties Questionnaire, and that's a dyslexia screener as well that you can do yourself and you can have the teacher do. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So these are the benchmarks we do in the district, and here's your benchmark report. This is a 4th grader. This was published by the district on a board committee agenda just this week. And so I want you to note some things here, because when people see this, it can be confusing. So it can look like this student is really high in terms of their performance. So here's the benchmark, and here's where the student is performing, and then the scores are down here. So you see that the proficiency range is 90 words per minute or more on this assessment. This is the foresight assessment, which is a predictor of how well a student's going to do on the PSSAs. It is a reading comprehension test, but it is not a true benchmark assessment, and I've never seen it used to guide instruction. It's usually just used to kind of get a temperature to see if the child, so they would compare these scores and determine whether or not it looked like they were struggling enough to be put into reading support or bridge. And this, I believe, starts, did you take this in 3rd grade? Yeah, I think this starts in 3rd grade. So I'm focusing on this Acadians oral reading fluency here. So something to note is that the benchmark on this is actually higher than most of the benchmarks for Acadians. This is set at the 49th percentile. So anyone who would score below benchmark, like this student, would have a red flag for the district. For a parent, I might be concerned if my highly verbal child was scoring at the 49th percentile and I knew that his ability in other areas was much higher. It might be something that I would question. So that's just something to note. And I'm going to show you what the percentiles are for each benchmark, just so that you have an understanding of kind of the whole picture. You will not get these percentiles on this report, but we have a link here that you'll get in an email that you can click on, and I'm going to show you how to kind of move through that so you can figure that out on your own. So here's another visual of our benchmark norms. This is a pyramid of all the oral reading fluency scores in our district for this period right now.
You have those scores now?
I do not have those scores.
Okay.
So the district published this. It's on, we have an education committee meeting tomorrow night to go over the reading program, and they published this. So this was published by the district. I added some.
Oh, I see. You got a triangle.
Yeah, I got the triangle.
But you didn't get the raw scores.
No.
So we still don't know how our child's doing relative to their peers on those benchmarks.
No, but the district can now determine district norms with all these numbers, which is good. Last year we didn't have this, so you guys can start asking for those things now. I would recommend it if you have questions about that. But if you look at this is 1st grade. These are the kids who are being put into reading support. Okay, different tiers of reading support in general. Sometimes there are other things that will move kids into reading support, but in general, these are the kids in reading support, tier 2 and tier 3. If you look at this benchmark, it's at the 36th percentile nationally. So that means that anybody who performs or right about benchmark is going to be in the tier 1 instruction. So what I would want to know as a parent is if my kid is meeting benchmark, where are they? Okay, first up. You can go into this document, which I have a link to, and you can look You have to look, it's not an easy one to get through, but you can look under oral reading fluency and look at the word count. And you can find, so I know that this was 23 because I had it on the other page. So 23 words per minute in the middle of the year for first grade, because we're in winter, is at the 36th percentile. So as a parent, that's good information for me to have. And I can do it with the other benchmarks that I have as well to see if there are any discrepancies. And as you dig into the benchmarks, if we go back, how do I go back? So you can see for first grade, there's oral reading fluency, only words correct. Okay, there are other things we can measure there, but I'll talk about that later. And then there's non-sequential fluency, correct letter sequences, and whole words read. So you can look at all of those and see where your child fits in that picture, percentile-wise. And that, for me as a parent, is a little more easy to understand, especially if I have questions. And I recommend you doing that if you have questions. Trying to think, is there anything else here? So you will have, I don't know, has everybody seen these for their kids? Have you logged on and seen these? You will have different graphs, and just know that this is just the number that they scored correctly. It's not a percentile. So when you look at this, sometimes it skews it, and you, like if you have a kid up here, you think that they're achieving the 100th percentile. But just know that that's a little bit hard to read. Okay, so these, if we go back, these are our benchmark norms. So these are the percentiles nationally that our benchmarks are set at by Acadians. Acadians is the company that's done all the research to determine what benchmarks scores kids need to hit to determine whether or not they have the probability of being successful readers. So that benchmark score means that there's about an 80 to 85% chance that the kids will be successful readers without intervention, okay? And so, but if you go through each one, you can see that those percentiles where they're set nationally are pretty low, and if you're thinking of your own kids, sometimes, you know, I just thought that information would be helpful. So if you have benchmarks with you, it's helpful to look at this, and I can answer questions about that, but I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. Okay, now we're going to look at, this is the benchmark schedule that Acadians recommends. So at each grade level, there are recommended benchmarks. We don't do all of these in TE, but you can request that they be done if you have a question about your child's performance. So let's move to the ones that are recommended here. So this is the recommended schedule of benchmarks, and you can see that as we get down, well, first of all, as we're up here in kindergarten, there's what's called the composite score. And this is what Acadians has developed as their most comprehensive way of looking at both sides of that equation. So looking at the language comprehension part of the equation and the decoding equation. And they put them together to give you this composite score or kind of estimate of your child's reading performance. You can figure this out for your kids in kindergarten because I think we're doing all of the benchmarks, and I've helped parents do that, and it's helped them to see whether or not they should be concerned. As we move down to first grade, some of the things that go away, the first thing that I would recommend is if you have a child whose fluency seems like it's at benchmark and everyone's fine with that performance, the first thing I would ask is how is their accuracy? So a lot of times kids might be at benchmark and reading enough words per minute, but when you look at whether or not they're actually reading every word that they're attempting correctly, the accuracy starts to look really different compared to the fluency number. So that's another place that I would ask, and that's actually, even though it's not reported to you, the teacher knows it, okay? Even though it's not put on that grid, they know that John attempted 140 words and read 120 words. And as you move up in grades, the accuracy expectation is much higher. So in first grade, it's a little bit, I think, above 90%, but almost immediately it gets to the 95%, 98%. Because what do you want? We want kids to read everything accurately. We don't want them skipping words or missing things. Again, the composite score, if you're getting on to second grade, we have what's called, I guess it's at the end of first grade, retell. So this is where that comprehension piece comes in. If you notice, there's not a specific benchmark for comprehension. that we're doing in TE. We do, if we go back, if you look at your benchmark schedule for TE, we do in second grade do the maze, which is this fast fill in the blank with a vocabulary word, pick a word. I've seen kids who are compensators kind of do well because they memorize words and they have a large vocabulary or background knowledge and they're able to fill it in. But when asked to retell, which is they read out loud and they retell the story, that's where they start to fall apart or where you see a red flag. So those are things that we don't do as a district, but we have the assessments. So if you're concerned, you can ask for them. And you can use, I think it was on the last slide. If you look here at this link, the reading benchmark goals, that explains all this. It's not as complex as it sounds. It's actually pretty simple to read, but it gives you the reasoning behind it and what it means. And it's a tool that you can take to your teacher and say, and the district actually publishes this on the benchmark page. So when you go onto the website to see your child's benchmarks, there's a link to this as well. So this is something, I think this is a phenomenal tool. It's really helpful for me. I don't even remember sometimes what benchmarks my kids are supposed to be getting. One of the biggest ones that I would say is this nonsense word fluency, correct letter sounds and whole words read. And then another one, this phoneme segmentation. Sometimes you see kids really doing well with other things and just bombing that because of that phonemic awareness deficit. Sorry, I'm clicking on that right now. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about benchmarks? They are confusing. Yes?
Are teachers given the specific results that the kids have on here to guide any kind of?
So the teachers do them. Oh, so the teachers do the benchmarks. So the thing about benchmarks is they're super fast. So we can do this whole benchmark schedule up to 6th grade, and it would probably be 15 minutes a kid per, maybe a little bit more as they get older and the passages get longer. But in the early grades, they're 1 minute each. Like so, phonemic segmentation, the nonsense word fluency are super fast, and the teachers have that information that they're taking it. What I would say is that our teachers in kindergarten through 2nd grade have just started with what's called letters training. So that's training in the science of reading. And they're starting to get the knowledge that they need to use these tools. So it's going to be, there's going to be a lag. I think parents help in this process by asking the questions. And we have a lot of teachers who are working really hard to understand this. And then I would say the system we have in place is probably lagging slower than the teacher acquisition of knowledge, if that makes sense. So if you get that information, you can start to look at that 4-part processor. You can use this tool, this student literacy profile, which I highly recommend if you're concerned about your child digging into this. This is something that parents fill out and teachers, and then it tells you that piece that Jackie talked about that's kind of missing in general, that diagnostic assessment piece. It guides the teachers in the school to what they should be doing to kind of look into areas of weakness. It doesn't say what tests to do usually, but it's really helpful. I think one of the other things that if you're concerned about your child, having a listening comprehension assessment done and seeing whether or not there's a mismatch between their reading comprehension and listening comprehension, if they're at the point where they're reading at all, is important, or their performance on those phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and phonics skills can also help. So on the benchmarks. So like for instance, you have a kid in the 99th percentile for listening comprehension, but they're in the 30th percentile for those skills. That's probably an indication that there should be some heavy decoding work and heavy phonemic awareness work. And our last session was on phonemic awareness, and Jackie had some really good recommendations on things that you can do at home. I've heard good feedback from parents who are doing those things. I'm starting with my 3.5-year-olds because they have siblings who have language-based learning disabilities. And then I have one in the middle who's had a tutor since kindergarten. And she's, doing really well because we kind of caught it early. So those are just some things I'd recommend. Yes?
You may have mentioned this earlier, I'm sorry if you did. So Wallingford Swarthmore School District, what benchmark are they using? We don't know.
So I don't know. I mean, I would, the name brands, the kind of quick and easy ones are Ames Web.
Okay.
We use Ames Web in our special education department, but not for benchmarks. Ames Web has a really good graphing system where you can get this data given to you on a graph and see what the progress looks like. So if you have a kid who's struggling, after these benchmarks are done, they're not done. What happens is that the team decides what type of intervention to give them, and then they are monitoring progress to see if that intervention is working. And so you would, initially the team would hopefully diagnose the area of weakness. So these are just saying, this is a red flag, we've got to do something. The team takes the kid, they do what Jackie showed you with the phonics, the WIST or the Woodcock-Johnson, or some sort of phonics screener. There's a phonemic awareness test that our district uses. It's called the PAST. And you guys, if you were here last time, or if you have access to our presentation from last time, you can hear about that. But that's something you could definitely ask for. So if you know, my son, he is not doing well on phonemic segmentation. Could you guys please do a PAST on him? That's something you could go in and ask your teacher. Your teacher should know what it is. If your teacher doesn't, their reading specialist absolutely does, and you're allowed to ask for that. You don't have to ask for an evaluation. You can just say, could you do this phonemic awareness test that I heard about, and then you get results. Or you could have someone do it outside as well. But not as many people do the phonemic awareness test consistently because it's new. So I mean, we are definitely, in our district, we're starting to move towards this. Yes?
I actually have two questions. I'm sorry. The Ames Web is a benchmark, not the graphing system.
It's both. So,
It's both.
so Ames Web is a system that, it's a progress monitoring system that has a benchmark schedule.
Okay.
So both Ames Web and Acadience can be used for benchmarking and progress monitoring. So when your kid's identified with a reading difficulty, the progress monitoring is what you want to see. You don't just want to see their benchmark scores. You want to see, depending on the severity of the discrepancy or of their problem, you want to see once a month, once every 2 weeks, or once a week progress monitoring. And ideally, you would see it on a graph so that you can see whether or not they're growing like this, because that's what you want out of intervention. You don't want your kid growing like this, because they're never going to catch up to benchmark or to their peers. You want to see this. And most schools do that for progress monitoring, but you have to ask.
And the progress monitoring is generally at a lower grade level. So if you think about, like, if you have a third grade child who's being benchmarked and they're a year and a half below grade level, you're not going to see big jumps in the benchmark. So we'll progress monitor them at a lower level to make sure that the rate of learning is at that steep slope that we want to see to close that gap.
Okay.
So they don't, even though the tool is the same, it is like
You'll just see a smaller.
yeah, because
Will almost look flatter.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if they're in reading support though, in our district, they might be progress monitored at grade level because they haven't, because they're trying to catch them early. So they're seeing that they're below benchmark and they're trying to make them catch up at grade level. Yes.
Does TE's new curriculum have parts of the science of reading in it? I know that they were picking out a new curriculum.
So the curriculum has been announced. There's a meeting tomorrow night if anyone's interested at 7 o'clock at the district office. It's the education committee meeting.